The middle of the 20th century was a time of transformation for the railroad, and by the end of World War II, steam locomotives were being replaced by diesel, passenger service was in decline, and older communication technologies such as the telegraph and Morse Code were starting to be replaced. Recently, John Springer, who is a regular contributor to the Trackside Photographer, called me on the phone. John had been talking to several retired railroaders who were telegraphers during the days of steam power and Morse code. John suggested that we preserve their stories, and a few days before Christmas 2021, we recorded a conversation about a time that lives only in the memories of the men and women who were there. John, before we start, why don't you go around and just sort of make it? We're still missing somebody, aren't we?
Yeah, Chuck didn't show up yet.
Okay.
That's Lavina, and she's the only female here, and she was an operator up in Canada, and her husband was she was on for about 10 years, Lavina.
Um, I was a commercial operator actually, but I grew up in a railroad station, and so I did telegraphy since I was about 10 years old, and I also, growing up in a railroad station, I had a lot to do with the trains and whatnot. And we lived near a junction, and so I saw a great big train wreck at the junction, and had quite an experience living in a railroad station.
I'm sure growing up in a train station. I read a book about them that Chris Hausler had recommended about different stations that had facilities for the operator to live in. And Jim Murphy, you probably have experience with that up there in way up north like that in Vermont.
Well, years ago, the agents did live in the station. There were living quarters, usually upstairs over them. When I started up, that was long gone, but it does way back in the 1800s, early 1900s. There were many men lived right there in the station with their family, and that was their home. So,
yeah, but none of the places you worked at.
Nope. I could do this for you.
There you go.
We lived right in the station, and saw all the trains go by, and even the troop trains during the war. It was very interesting.
Yeah. But Lavina, the station where you lived, is that where you started as a telegrapher?
Yes, I was lived there until I was 17 years old when I decided I'd go into Winnipeg. We were quite up in northern Manitoba. It was really in the sticks, I think. Mm-hmm. And I grew up there till I was 17. I decided to go into Winnipeg and try out as a commercial operator. I got hired out right away, but I used to copy train orders quite a bit, and I saw a big train wreck because we lived right at a junction, and also when I was during the war. They didn't use cars, and the farmers used what they call the cutters during the winter time with horses, and just like a little closed place, and the train hit one of these and brought in the people into our waiting room, and I had to help tear up bandages. The 3 people died, so it was quite an experience.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, when I was president of the Morse Telegraph Club, I went to Edmonton, and one of the operators came up to me and he said, "That was my uncle and aunt that died, that you looked after."
Right. Well, maybe each of you could tell a little bit about how you got started. What drew you into telegraphy, and how did you get started in that? And during the course of your railroad career, was that your primary duty, or did you do other things as well?
I learned I learned telegraphy from about the age of 10. Just when I'd hear the telegraph under my bedroom, we had one of these transoms for getting the heat through, and I could hear the telegraph going all the time. So I decided I would like to know what was going on. So I had my dad teach me the code. He was the station master there. And I used to talk to a bunch of other kids that were layering the telegraph up and down the line. And then I decided I'd do that for a living.
All right, Jim, how about you? How'd you get into it?
Well, it was by accident in a way, but I'm glad I did it. Back in, I'm from here, up there in St. Albans, Vermont, Central Vermont Railway, okay? And in my junior year of high school, I was going to a young lady. She was in our class, and we were going together for 2 or 3 years. And her father was the chief train dispatcher for the Central Vermont Railway. And he stopped me one day and he said, "How would you like to take the course we're going to give this year?" And I said, "Well, I heard it's only for seniors." And he says, "It's my class. I can put in it who I want." So I went in and signed up for it. And it was 3 nights a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday nights, about 7 o'clock at night for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, down at the general office building in St. Albans. In fact, for a while, it was actually in a railroad car that we used to learn this. And it started out with 24 people in the class and ended up at 3 that passed after the 9 months. A year later, Mr. Jackson calls me up. He says, "You're coming to work for us, aren't you?" And I says, "You still want me?" I wasn't going with Sandy anymore. And he said, "Oh, sure." He said, "We're still friends." So about 4 months before I took my physical, I did my rules, and I graduated on a Sunday here in St. Albans from high school. And the next day I was in Milton, Vermont, which is about 12 miles south of St. Albans, breaking in with Mr. Jacobs, the station agent. I sat with him for a month, actually doing the work, because before just learning in a class, you can't get the feel for it. But I was there for, and then in July 10th of 1955, I was assigned to second trick at the junction outside the capital of Vermont to work the 4 to midnight shift. And what it was is the man who had that job, he covered all the good jobs in the summertime, so he didn't have to work his afternoon shift. So I took that job over to work it, planned for about 3 months, 4 to midnight. And within the first month, July 30th, I'm there at the office. I've got my shirt off and my t-shirt on, okay? And it's a hot, humid day, and a man comes to the ticket window and he says, "Young man, is the train to Washington, D.C. on time?" I said, "Yes, sir, right on time." He goes back out in the waiting room at Montpelier Junction, a nice little station, not big, but I looked out and I says, "I know that man." So I put my shirt on and I go out very briefly out in the waiting room to talk to the Vice President of the United States, Richard Milhouse Nixon. And he was there because his girls were going to a girls' camp up in Roxbury, Vermont. And nobody knew where he was going to get on the train with his wife, and he happened to be coming at Montpelier Junction. So I got my thing within a few weeks of working for the railroad. Here I am talking to the Vice President of the United States. And I went on and on from there for many years. We had 19 stations that I covered as a spare operator. And out of the 19, I covered 17 of them. I actually worked Canadian border, south of Montreal, there about 40 miles. And I loved it, loved it all the time. So there's more to the story, but I don't know how soon you want to go into this story, or you want to let somebody else talk.
I was going to ask, and maybe we start with Lavina again. I was going to ask you to describe sort of what a typical shift in the office was like for you. I mean, what were your duties and how did all that fall out?
It varied quite a bit, actually. I worked in several places. First, I started out in Winnipeg, and then I was sent to Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, another quite good-sized city. But then I went to what they call Fort William, which is now called Thunder Bay, and walked into the office, and the manager there said, "Well, we aren't having any women here work here." unless you come down in the basement with me. Well, that I didn't agree with. And but I started working on the evening shift there. And as soon as I had a day off, I went in to see the union. And they laughed and they says, "Oh, you can have no that. You don't need to bother with that." And so anyway, I bid out of Fort William as soon as I could. And I worked in some offices where I had to do the clerk's job, keep the counting and, wait on the customers and send telegrams. The other offices, I worked in the larger offices, you just copy news for the newspapers and take telegrams from stations across the province. So the jobs really varied. Each city you went to was a little bit different. Winnipeg had maybe about 30 operators. Saskatoon, about 10 or 15. But worked in Moose Jaw, where I was sent there at age 18 to run the office and do the counting and everything all by myself. So things really varied. I had some, nice experiences. One day in the counter when I was worked in Port Arthur, which is also Thunder Bay now, the Prime Minister of Canada came in to send a telegram. He was staying in the hotel. Actually, the office was right in the hotel. And so I waited on him. And
Nice.
being president, I was president of the Morse Telegraph Club for 5 years. And during that time, I talked to the last World War veteran, I think, for both the US and Canada. He was 107, John Babcock, and he was a member of the Spokane chapter. He was a telegrapher. He still had a very good fist. He could still send, and he died at 108.
Wow.
Lavina, when did you hire?
I'm now coming up 93. I went to work when I was 17 and worked through to pretty well to 1954. My last job was in Vancouver here, and I had the opportunity to work with Time magazine in 1952 when Eisenhower was running for president. They put me on the direct line to Time magazine. I sat on that line all day, and I used to talk to the operator in Time magazine and between the news bulletins.
So help me understand here, your job involved handling traffic not only for the railroad, but for other people who were sending telegraph messages?
Yes. We had a switchboard, to all the towns along the way, and the light would go on if they had a telegram. We'd just plug in and copy the telegram. And same if we had a telegram for them, we just plugged in
So this all took place though under the auspices of the railroad, or was it a separate company?
This is a commercial office,
Okay,
but we're often connected, very close to the railroad office.
Right.
I worked up northern Manitoba, Flin Flon, a big mining town, and our offices are right together, right in the station, the railroad station.
Lavina, you did work for the railroad for about 10 years. Did I remember that correctly?
Well, I work the commercial is not Western Union. It's like Western Union, only it's run by the Canadian National Railways. And then when I got married, and my husband was a dispatcher in Vancouver, right at the West Coast, I quit the CN and went to the CN wouldn't take me because I was married to a guy who was working for the CN. They don't do that now. And so I went over to the Canadian Pacific Railway. But all the commercial offices are run by the railroad.
Okay. I never knew that from Chris Hassler. So the commercial telegraph offices that were for the general public and businesses and like Wall Street, things like that, all those offices were run by the railroad.
Yes, that's right.
Oh,
Not by Western. Western Union worked differently. But we were like Western Union working for the railroad.
okay.
And how about you, Jim? Is that pretty much the way you worked as well, or was your situation different?
It's very close. The telegraph was every station had 3 wires in it. They had a major wire which would go from the bigger stations to station. Then you had one that would cover all stations. Then we had a Western Union line that went to Boston. So anybody who was selling telegram, want to send a telegram, would come into the office and they'd write out their telegram, pay for it, and we'd send it. It went to Boston on the Boston line. So that was, it was actually the telegraph wire was put up by the Western Union Company for many, many years ago. And the railroad bought it out finally, but the Western Union stayed in the stations. The only stations we did not have a telegraph is like in the office is because like in St. Albans where I lived, they had a Western Union office, which is open 24 hours a day. So people could go up there just one street up from where I was working and do it there. But along with the way she was saying, we don't just go in there and work for the railroad. If you got the night job, you were the janitor, you kept the fires going, you washed the windows, you mopped the floors, you did all the work in that station. And if it were daytime, you did the accounting, you worked like that, you worked with customers, you shipped cars out, you received cars in. And it's quite a job to learn. And I was fortunate that I was, most of the stations I worked in did have a general agent there too. Even when you're working first shift, there was an agent who took care of all that stuff. But if he went on vacation, then you had to be ready because to take it over until he came back. So, and I learned awful quick.
So could you talk a little bit about your specific railroad duties? How did it work when you were handling just railroad? I mean, I assume you were working with the dispatchers and transmitting messages for them, and explain a little bit about how that all worked.
Well, every station, as I said, there were something like 18 or 19 on what they call the Northern Division of the Central Railway. I worked on most of them except for a couple I did not work on. You did work directly. Now, when I started in 1955, of course, you had a telephone system. So your dispatchers would work on the phone system. You got copy your trainers, put your clearances out. But when I started at Montpelier Junction, that was also the central point where they had an engine house, a work crew, the extra gang worked out of there. So at the end of the day, they brought all their paperwork in and you had to send all that stuff out. And at the same time, the general office building in St. Albans, which was 60 miles away, they would send all kinds of paperwork that you had to copy and copy and copy, multiple copies for all these different people to come in and plan their work for the next day. But it was a busy man. In fact, when I first started out, I wasn't terribly fast on the wire. When I got down to Montpelier Junction, the first day I worked, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the wire comes alive and I'm there copying, and I kept breaking and giving them the last word like we had to, and they'd start back up and go ahead, and then again I cut it, and finally the key went dead. And all of a sudden we had a message phone that ran from station to station to station, and it went ring, ring, ring. And what it was, the ring was from Montpelier Junction. And I said, well, somebody's calling me. So I entered Montpelier Junction, and this man says, who's this? And I says, Jim Murphy. He says, who are you? I says, I'm the operator here. You says, you ain't much of an operator, are you? He says. And I said, well, I'm working hard on it. He said, back on the wire. After the 3 months there, when I transferred to another station, he was happy with me. Now he could send to me and I could send to him, but if he hadn't pounded away, I probably would not have made much of a telegraph operator, because after about 1965, they no longer had to know telegraphy when you hired as an operator, because it lasted till 72 on the CV railroad when they pulled up the telegraph. But it was a busy place. Of course, train orders back then, we didn't have like train. We have Amtrak today. In the morning, going south and coming back in the evening. There's no stations open at all the way from St. Albans to almost Palmer. There's no operators anymore, no more agents. It's a general agent who covers from one place. He may cover the whole Southern Division, does all the paperwork. It's a different operation altogether.
Lavina, how did you work with the railroad? Did you work with the dispatchers as well, or did you have other duties?
No. We did work with the operators though, because they had to send their telegrams from the towns into us, and then we'd relay them to whatever place that the telegrams went. One interesting, when I was up at Flin Flon, they had quite a good hockey team called the Flin Flon Bombers, and we had a telegraph set right in the arena, and I had to go usually on my day off, and it was on a Sunday, and play-by-play hockey into the Winnipeg Free Press. So luckily, my brother was a hockey player when he was in school, so I knew a little bit about hockey.
That was just like the old days with the baseball, with the World Series. As I understand it, they would be telegraphing, and I've seen pictures. Chris Hausler has sent out pictures of reporters, and you'd see a line at the ballpark of reporters, and they all had a key, and they were all tied into a wire that was put up for them, and they were wiring. They would send out how the game was going, and I'm sure these two right here probably recall. That's how you were out in the middle of Canada where she was in East Jabru. That's how you found out what the hell was going on. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Not
I had to report news, like we had a big hotel fire up in Flin Flon. Flin Flon was I guess you'd almost call it a city, but it was a big mining town, very rough place. I had to haul drunks out of the washroom when I wanted to close up. I was all by myself in the station at nighttime, and it was kind of scary at times when people come in drunk, and I had to get them out. And once a guy passed out in the men's washroom, and I had to go and drag him out, put him out on the platform.
Yeah, when I was working as an operator, as I said, dispatchers had a phone line all the way down through. But the third trick dispatcher, Herbie Kenyon, was not an old timer, but he liked to work on the key. So he would come in and put out train orders and messages on the wire, no matter if you could copy or not. But he used to do it that way. But he was on third shift, worked the midnight to 8 shift. And he left the railroad in the mid-1960s, and that's when I went in 1965 to be a spare train dispatcher, dispatching the Northern Division. And then a short time after that, they opened up and closed the dispatcher's office in New London, Connecticut, which is 320 miles from St. Albans. And so then we dispatched the whole line from St. Albans all the way through up to St. John's, Quebec. The CN Railroad, of course, owned the Central Belt Railway from 1928 or 29, and we were under control by the Canadian National. We had wires to Montreal, the dispatcher's office, We also have teletype machines that we used back in the mid-1960s in the major offices for sending and receiving journals and stuff like that. You cut tape, then play the tape out with what the journal was on the time. Actually, back then also you had to send an X7 when a train left your town. You had to send an X7, which was a consist of what's in the train, to the next major station. Like St. Albans would be one. It'd be down into White River Junction. Now they knew what there was coming for a train and how they were laid out, and how they knew when they came in there. They changed crews, and another crew would take it over and take it to Brattleboro, Vermont, and set it all the way down the line. And when I started, of course, with her, we were running steam. Our last steam engine ran in 1957.
And what railroad was that?
The Central Vermont Railway. The Central Vermont Railway, April of 1957 was the last steam that they ran.
Okay. You had mentioned before, Jim, that you were slow when you first started out. Tell me, y'all, what was considered a decent speed? What did you shoot for in terms of your key speed on the key?
Well, they looked at about 40 words a minute. You could always send faster than you could receive. But with Francis Boudreau, he's the one that worked me up and worked me up and worked me up. And I that one of the meetings when all the people, the retirees got together for a party, and he was sitting over in the corner and I was a guest speaker. And I said, if that man over there hadn't pounded me to hell, I says, I wouldn't have been an operator. But he kept working at me. And Francis kind of waved at me. He's like, I did it. He said, I got you to work. But you could send fast. You get a bug. My first thing my mother did, she bought me a Bioreflex bug to work with. Well, you only send as fast as you can receive. You don't want to show off. So, but I worked in every station all the way down through. St. Albans had a yard office, which was built around 1893 in what they call Italy Yard. I worked in there as a telegraph operator. We had a teletype. Then you had the main office about a mile from where the yard office was. That was a full-size telegraph office with all teletype, all kinds of work there. Then after that, every station all the way down the line had their own telegraph. You have different people. When I started working there were a lot of people who were getting very close to retirement ages. And I never thought much about it, but I'm glad I had got the job. I was going to go in to be a draftsman, and then they changed my mind, so I went to work with them. The only problem had happened that in 1969, the Canadian National Railway closed the dispatcher's office in St. Albans and put it in Montreal. So there goes my job as spare dispatcher. There wasn't a job I could hold anymore because they'd closed so many stations. The only job I could cover was go to Montreal and dispatch. That's a 65-mile each way, or go to New London, Connecticut and work as a clerk. So I said no. So I left the railroad. I had some real good jobs. Then they brought the dispatcher's office back from Montreal, and the CV Railway called me up and said, your job's back. Come on back to work. So I went back to work in 1980, and I worked up to 1999 and retired in 1999. Was about 34 years service with the railroad. So.
And talking about speed, I went up to about 60 words a minute because we used what the commercial operators, if you're copying news and whatnot, we used what they call the Phillips Code. And you type the word out, but it's a short form, like for that would be just double T. For paid would be PD, and so on and so forth. But you spelled the word right out. But we did close to about 60 words a minute, I think. And when I took a typing test, when I went back to school afterwards, I passed over 80 words a minute typing, just on an ordinary typewriter. So we had to be a commercial operator. We had to go very fast.
This Phillips Code was sort of like shorthand.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Very similar to some of the shorthand.
Right. And speaking of that, what was the common Morse code that you use? I know the railroad for a while had their own Morse code.
We used the same one that you would use, American Morse.
American Morse code. I mean, there's international Morse code as well, right?
No, didn't use the international. Actually, the American is 20% faster than the international.
Yeah, the international was 13 characters different, but all the numbers are different. So I had learned that in Boy Scouts. So I had to change over a little bit. And in fact, I almost went to work for the Border Patrol here in St. Albans as a telegraph operator. But then I had to go back to international again and learn that all over. I said, no, I'm going to stay where I am. I'm not going to chance it. So.
Right. And there was also a railroad Morse code at some point, which was different from American Morse code, as I understand it.
No,
Is that correct?
the railways all use the American Morse code.
Okay.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, when I retired from the railroad in 1999, a year and a half later, an engineering firm here in the state of Vermont called ECI called me up and hired me as a flagman to protect other contractors working around the tracks, all the way from the Canadian border at Alberg all the way to New London, Connecticut. And I did that from 2001 up to 2019. And they paid very well. It worked nicely for me because I became, back in 1970, I became a historian of the railroad in Vermont and all the railroads in Vermont. And for a long time, I was traveling all over historical societies and talking on the history of their talk. And I still do them. I still, this past weekend, we had a big celebration in town. I set up a Lionel train setup for a Christmas celebration for 2 days. I'm not in the Lionel trains, but I set up there for them. I'm in a museum here in town, been with them for 45 years now. They're going to hang me on the wall as an artifact when I pass away because I'm older than anybody up there. I belong to the Rutland Meredith Historical Society, the Dots and Dashes, you name them. I'm in almost every organization and I'm active with them. I'm not just sitting back licking. I like to be part of what I'm doing. So.
Well, you know, with your years of experience in the railroads and in telegraphy, you must have some interesting stories, things that happened to you. What kind of things stand out to you as events that were particularly memorable?
Well, I had the first thing with Richard Nixon coming in. That would probably top them all off. And I had other movie stars would come in. A lot of people, remember, came to Stowe to go skiing, and they would come up by train. And they would stop and come in. Same thing at Essex Junction, which is just outside of Burlington. The people would come in, and they would take the train. They wouldn't make reservations, but I knew what night they were traveling, so I'd have them a bedroom already set for them. So when they walked in the house by my bed, I said, "You got the same one tonight. You had it last week." So it worked out. I got to know the people as people, not just as a person going somewhere, but I worked with them. The funny stories, here I am just out of high school when I was working in Randolph, Vermont. Back then you had Railway Express also, that you received Railway Express and you shipped out Railway Express. But on the train coming in that night, a lot of things there, the farmers used to receive these little small chicks in the boxes, about 24 little small baby chicks to a box. Well, I was all by myself at the station. It'd be a very quiet night. So I opened up one of the boxes and I let the chicks run all over the station all day long. I got them all back in the box in the morning. But I told people about that. I said, "You're crazy." And I said, "Yeah, but I was lonesome." I said, "They kept me going all night long." The major ones were train wrecks as a dispatcher. I had some major ones. They weren't little ones, they were major ones. On one crew there, the whole crew should have been killed, but the second unit took all the blood and there was nothing left. That whole second unit was totally, they went into a hole and piled on top of each other. And I knew, of course, I knew all the guys. When you're on a small railroad like this, I know every guy by nickname, by what they call them and stuff like that. But those were major things. A lot of things, though, what I did is the rules aren't made to be broken. Just don't get caught. That's the story. Because sometimes you couldn't run a train. We worked train orders. Then they went to a new system. Then they went to the track warrants that they're using today. And because we don't have any signal systems up here except from White River south. But up in the northern division, it's all dark territory. So with the track warrants, that works nice because the guy's got the order. He owns the track for that train. It's the section men have to have an after arrival and stuff like that to work out the tracks. So that became easier than train orders, because train orders, you had first class trains, second, third, fourth class trains. The controlling was southbound trains, and northbound had to make sure they cleared all other trains. And we had these sounders out there telling where the trains were. Well, the train went by the sounder one night, and I says, no, he can't make the next station. He's not going to get there on time. We got a problem here, and they didn't have radios. This is all done. It's dark territory. For some reason, the southbound passenger train had been a little bit late, and so they dropped the board on them at Richmond, and so the train came in, and they waited, and all of a sudden, about 5 minutes later, after the train would have left, here comes the freight train pulling in on the siding. Well, that was a scary one all by itself, because you didn't know, there's no way to get to those guys. You can't run down the track because they're going to go farther in times. But I had train go by the one night at Essex Junction. I signaled to them, I think you got a hot box. They just flagged it off. They got to the next station. They broke the axle right in two. They put that train in every other which direction. They tried to blame me for it. I says, no, I told them. I mean, I gave them the signal. They got a hot box, and it's, stop the train. They just kept on going, and scary things like that. But
is that that's hot box, right?
Yes, yeah, that's one of them. Yeah, there's different ones. Then you had a sticking brake. The other thing, working night shift, because everybody rested up at night once they didn't have a lot of work to do. And I had 2 episodes there. One, that Northfield, Vermont, you had a remember the big oak tables? You had a chance to lay out, you put your coat on it and lay back. You know where the trains were. Well, I really fell asleep one night, and all of a sudden, here comes a train whistling going by the crossing. I get off the desk and I take about 1 step. Well, my right leg was gone to sleep. You ever flatten yourself out on the floor? Wow, you're out there. So I crawled out the door to wave a highball on the train, but that was one of those things. Waterbury, Vermont, I fell asleep, woke up one night, train was going by the station. I went out, I grabbed the lights and turned it on. I went outside. All there was is flat cars on the train. Flat car. What's going on? Flat car. Then finally, I went back in, and I all west the train by, and it was Herbie Kenyon was the dispatcher, and I said, "Where are all the flat cars going?" And he says, "Why?" And he says, "There's no flat cars on that train." They assumed finally that I was walking in my sleep. And I walked out there. I wasn't seeing any crap, but I was sleeping right through the whole thing. So good jobs up and down the line. I had a couple times in the yard. They say I threw a switch under the train. They tried to, but General Railway Signal come up and said it's impossible, because in Italy Yard in mid-1950s, they did put the CTC board in the cover that coming in the yard and in the yard. And so once you've given a signal, even if you take it away, you got a 3-minute delay before you can change it. And the brakeman called out to the engineer, green, while he saw the switch points going over. While the engineer was regular, he wanted to get back into, because they're going off duty, and the Washingtonian was coming soon, and he hit that circuit before it went all the way over, and he went on the ground, sideways and every other which way. And he said, "Oh, I had a green. Well, I know he didn't have a green, and so, but those are things where you've got to work it out with management, and I seem to have problems for some reason. When I went back to work in 1980, it was even worse, because I was now older than management. All these other guys were young people who had all been for the rail for a while. And then when the rail techs took over in 1995, the first thing I knew, I got so friendly with the general manager. Next thing I knew, I was on the GO team, traveled around the United States, starting up other railroads. A team of 20 people. Each one had our different things we did. And I traveled around starting up railroads. And then before I got out of there, I was in Cincinnati. They offered me the chief train dispatcher's job for all of Railtech, 30 railroads around the United States. And I said, "I'm retiring in 2 years." They said, "Don't. We'll double your pay. We want you to." I would never been home. I've been 6 months a year. I would have been on the road. And now in St. Albans with Genesee and Wyoming in here, the general office building, which is still there, built in 1865. The second floor is the dispatch center. There are 12 or 13 different dispatchers' desks in there. They're dispatching 100 railroads with 70 dispatchers all around the United States. That place is busy. It's fun to go up there and see these guys, where the guys and girls, a lot of women now are dispatching. It's surprising how many come in. And it's just, I've still got the keys to the building, but there's some people that don't know me and they question it when I'm on property, but they always want me to do something. So, but I do paperwork for them. They won a couple lawsuits because of the paperwork. When the railroad was sold in 1995, Genesee rail tax was coming in, and I was talking to the general manager. I said, "What's going to happen to all the paperwork that's in this building?" They said, "What they don't take back with them to Canada, we're going to throw it away." And I said, "Can I have what I want?" He says, "Take what you want." I moved 24 pickup truckloads of documents going way back to the 1850s when the railroad first started. I'm still cataloging it since 1995. But the paper, it's original paperwork, it's original documents, deeds, surveys, property owner.
Wow.
The seller. Speaking of my cellar is finished off look like a railroad station about 1925. And it's all wainscoting, got the telegraph office, the waiting room, the ticket office. It's all built in. It was wainscoting, ceiling, walls, and the whole work. So that's my office. And then one of the pictures I sent in to Ed, it shows the general office building. And in front of it, there's a little small building on Lake Street where the switch center would come out to flag cars and stuff like that. It was built in 1901. They stopped using it about 1966 or 67. It is now on my back lawn, all restored. So that's 100 some odd year old building on my back lawn. And that's,
Yeah.
I go too far with this stuff, but at the same time, I help other people with things that they're researching. I love doing it. I've got this stuff. So I don't know if any of you ever saw Bob Jones's books on the Central Vermont Railway. There's a 7-volume set called the Yankee something it was called. I did all of Bob's photographs for all the books he did. He did a couple up in Maine. He did the Central Vermont. He did the Granite Railways. He's done the Rutland Railroad. I did all that black and white printing in my darkroom down cellar, which I was a photographer since the 5th grade in school. I lived 3 houses from the main yard in St. Albans where I played. I don't know why I lived through it because we jumped under cars, on cars, in cars, and as kids and played there. But we lived. But it's got to be. My grandfather worked for the railroad. He worked for the D&H, the Rutland, the CV, and the B&M. He was one of the pictures. He's a cook in the cook car on the bridge and building. My father went to work at 16 years old as in the shops building parts for steam engines. Then worked out and went to American Bridge Company. He worked around, but they're all in the railroad. I never get it from them. I didn't even know my father and my grandfather had worked for the railroad when I started. So
Let's see how Charles is doing, if it's any better.
Yeah.
Chuck, say hello.
Hello there, folks.
There you go.
There he is.
There he is.
Welcome aboard.
Where's your hat? Where's your hat?
I don't have a hat. Oh, I can put one on. I've got one here.
Ed, he's got a New York Central hat stationed.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Okay, guys.
There it is. Look at this, Ed.
Here's my 1952
Oh.
operator's badge from the New York Central Railroad when I
Yep.
hired on it in May 22nd. I first worked a job on the Canada Division, and I had to have a badge on a used conductor's hat was okay. We bought them for $2 from the conductors. As soon as they got a little trace of shabbiness anywhere, the conductors would sell them to us operators who had to wear the hat when you're on or about the platform stations. You had to have that so the public could identify who has command of the public in that area. So we had to have this hat wherever we went. And I worked up and down the Canada Division from Niagara region, the border there, Niagara Frontier, I think we call it, to the Detroit River, back and forth, 224 miles, all the stations practically. And I had to have this hat wherever I went. I relieved agents and operations and did telegraph and train all kinds of work for 16 years before I went upstairs as a train dispatcher for 23 years. So that's a little clue as to what I was doing on the Canada Division on the North Shore, watching trains like the Empire State Express and the New York Special and the North Shore Limited. And even Amtrak ran in the last few years the Rainbow, what was it called? The Rainbow something. The Rainbow excursion. And it came through. The last passenger train we had was a one-way deal, once a day, I think 6 days a week, from Chicago to New York via the North Shore, went through Niagara Falls, Ontario, and Niagara Falls, New York. The only train at that time that did both of them from an American point to an American point.
Charles,
So
we've been going for a while here, and I've asked the other people how they got started in their career on the railroad, and so I'd like to ask you the same question. What brought you into all of this?
Well, I did take telegraphy that was international Morse, which is not used on the railways. And I did take it when I was 16 in Army cadets at Ipperwash. That's an Army camp where they trained you as a up and coming cadet when you're in high school. If you wanted to go, you got paid $60, I think it was, for 6 weeks. And so I thought, gee, that's good money, $60. So I booked, went to Ipperwash, and they fed me and looked after me for 6 weeks in the summer, and went back to high school in that fall, of course, in the fall. But I made $60. And I didn't realize the value of money, I guess, living at home for free out in the country, you know. And in fact, when I was 18, I started working for the County of Elgin every summer. And the last year I was finished high school, I was 18, 19, whatever. Yeah, I was 19, I think. Anyway, I got a job. I worked for them as a laborer for 65 cents an hour. And then they laid me off every October as soon as we put up the snow fence for the winter all over, and that why, nope, us spares, us young guys were all laid off for the winter, and they hoped to get us back the next summer. And I was planning on doing this and living off mom and dad in the winters, you know. But anyway, this one fall, I was got the notice that next week I'd be done at the County of Elgin as a grunt. So this guy took me aside. He says, "Hey," he says, "young fella," he says, "what's a guy like you with a high school degree," which was a big deal in the 50s, just post-war. You got your high school diploma. He says, "You should go into town and get a better job than out here. The only guy here that makes any more money than you is our foreman. There's one foreman for the County of Elgin for all the workforce, and he makes 70 cents an hour, or 75, I forget, but 75, I think." And he says that he's not going to die anytime soon. So he says, "You're stuck with 65 cents an hour. You can do better in town." I said, "Okay." So I went uptown and looked around. And, oh yeah, there's that great New York Central depot there. That I went back and forth for 6 years on the LMPS to high school from out in the country into town on this little Toonerville trolley kind of a railroad, LMPS, London Port Stanley Railway. And I rode it. And so I loved railroad stuff. And gee, I walked over to that, I got off the LMPS and went over to the big station nearby, the New York Central, and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a job." And I was just brat, full of vim and vigor, ready to go to work. And the guy I was talking to said, "You go upstairs and see Fuzzy," what's his name? Anyway, Fuzzy was his nickname, H.A. Archer. And I went up to say H.W. Archer. Anyway, went upstairs and he said, he says, we're not hiring till next spring." He says, "But you got to learn telegraphy to get a job here. That's the only thing open right now." So I says, "I've got telegraphy." He says, "What do you got?" And I says, "Army camp, 6 words a minute or something." And he says, well, no, you're going to have to do 20 words a minute on a different code. You'll have to forget the old one and learn the new one. And go out to Shedden here, a little town, west of town here, west of St. Thomas, and talk to the agent there. He takes on students, and he's allowed to train people at the office, his little station agent office, as there was hundreds and thousands of these little stations all over North America back from the 1880s on and earlier maybe. But anyway, it was an old station, and there was this guy. He turned out to be the laziest person I ever met in my life. He was the station agent there. Very little to do. Yes, we had the REA Express come and go twice a day, morning and night. But we weren't there at night when they arrived. When the train arrived, the local coming back, that station was closed at 5 p.m. But they had a key to get in the freight office, and they could take anything we had set inside the door ready to go, and they could drop off anything that came from Windsor. They're on their way to St. Thomas crew, and drop off anything there. But in the morning, we were there when the local arrived, and we'd get LCL, and we'd also get REA. And that's how I learned the railroad. It was at this little station. I had to pay him $300 for, was it 1 month, a month and a half training until I got up to speed. And then he said, okay, you can go back in the spring if you want for touch up, but you're going to get called the 1st of May about getting going for the summer and get a real job out of it here. So there I was, spending money, nothing to show for it. Back home to mom and dad, lived on the farm, and we rented on the farm. We didn't own the farm, so just a place to live. And so the next spring, back I went to the railroad when I got the call, and they said, tune up a little bit with the wire chief here in the wire office. There's a relay office, telegraph keys going all over, sounders going all over the place there, and round the clock, of course. And it was a Canada Division telegraph office in St. Thomas. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll be working here, but no. So anyway, I passed the wire test on the 16th of May and said next week, they said next Monday, you got to be in E&O. You got to hightail it down to a little tower, interlocking tower, east of Canfield and west of Welland, Ontario, and learn from Ken down there, the day man. Then there's no relief there, so you're going to be relieving him for 2 weeks, and there's nobody relieves you at night. You're done when you get released to go home. You're done for the day, and you might get called out Saturdays too. So I went down there and worked for Ken Harrington. I learned the tower in hours. Just about 8 levers, I think, 10 levers maybe. The THB Railroad, Toronto, Hamilton, Buffalo, crossed there, and they sent a train across our double track main line in the morning, and it came back sometime in late afternoon. Sometimes you had to get some overtime and wait for it and let it go, and then throw the signals back and set the signals for automatic on this ABS double track territory for overnight, including the reverse move, the pot signals between the track in each direction, for the backup moves if somebody had to come from the other direction wrong way. So yeah, so the very first weekend I forgot to pull those 2 in. Didn't use them all week because I didn't have any backup moves. And I forgot on Friday night, and I got a call Saturday morning, get your butt back to E&O Tower and put those 2 signals back in. We've got a report from the passenger train that just went through there that they're not lit, they're red. They didn't need that signal because they weren't backing up, but they noticed they should be there as usual for if there was a need for it. So I had to drive all the way to back again after spending 5 days up there, and on my own time and money and gasoline. And I think gas was a great big expense of like 45 cents a gallon or something at that time, 40 cents, I forget. Yeah, so I had to pay a couple dollars for gas to go the 80 miles, So anyway, that's my first job, and then I love that tower work. So then I learned BX Tower in St. Thomas, my hometown, a big tower with 40 levers in it. And it crossed a good old LMPS that I've been riding on for years to go to high school. And so I worked BX Tower off and on over the years, never did own a full-time job there, but they kept cutting. You guys remember it or know about it. In the 50s and 60s, those were the years of the big cuts because the highways were being built and the airplanes were flying and everybody wanted to own their own car and take the whole family with them when they went places. Nobody was riding the passenger trains and everything was going downhill. So I started off as 132nd man on the telegrapher's roster. That included the train dispatchers who were now working at the next level up, train dispatching. And there's 130, I was 132nd man. And they hired more after me. The next year they hired another 8. But anyway, they kept cutting and pretty soon they cut down to my level, but some guys were leaving. They could see they're going to cut their little station out and not enough business. And they'll have travel agents working along a 50-mile route up and back in one day to look after all these little agencies that weren't doing much. And so they cut out all these little places. So anyway, then I accepted the promotion to try out for train dispatching and passed it in 1967 or 68. In 1968, I was full-time dispatching midnights for 5.5 years before I could bid in the swing job there. And then I held that for the rest of my time in dispatching for a total of 23 years. And then Conrail appeared after Penn Central. And Conrail decided they couldn't operate in Canada. So they had to sell the property. All the employees would be going with it. And there were 204 of us by that time running the Canada division. And so they sold it to a consortium called Canadian National and Canadian Pacific. And Canadian National had the requirement in their partnership to be the front and write the checks and like pay the employees. So all of a sudden my paycheck as a dispatcher changed from New York Central to NYC. I'd already seen it change from NYC to PC, and now it went to Conrail and then CN. And I'm still doing the same job. But business kept falling, and as soon as they sold to CN and CP, we had no more through freights and whatnot. We used to have the high perishable trains going through from California to Boston and New York through the north on the north shore of NYC, over the Canada Division, through Niagara, down to Syracuse and that way, instead of through Cleveland. And they could do better time. We had 60-mile-an-hour freight track, double track, both ways, both directions on the main line, and ABS territory, automatic clock signal, really fast stuff. It's the latest technology. I don't know, it was in 1927 or what, long before I hired on there, they had the ABS territory. So it was a dream for a train dispatcher, just until finally they cut so many little stations, we didn't know where the heck the trains were. So they invented this, somebody, I think it was in New York State, they invented this, what's it called it? Anyway, it's can't think of the name of it right now. But anyway, it's a system where the track that has the power in it to run the lights and the ABS lights and the crossing protection could also be tapped for sending out a signal code on the dispatcher's voice line back to whoever's listening to the dispatcher line would hear all of a sudden, da-da-da-dit, da-da-da-dit, da-da-da, that's X. And it was a sign that the signal department assigned to Perry. Where they got X out of it, I don't know, but it was a place about 30 miles this side of Welland. We had a drawbridge at Welland, reported trains that went over the Welland Canal. The trains went over the Welland Canal there. He was still operating and reporting trains. Then we had nobody all the way to St. Thomas. And the travel agent, he's on the road with a car. He can't report trains because he doesn't know whether he'll be on where the trains are, or it's got nothing to do with them. So anyway, the poor dispatcher, so we had these, Enunciators, that's the name of it, Enunciators set up. You guys might be familiar with them too, any dispatchers, because it's a long piece of territory, and before radio became a permanent good fixture, you had to know where your trains were every so often. And so we had 8 enunciators on the East Division and the Western. That is, St. Thomas is in the middle. And so eventually we were dispatching, one dispatcher was doing both train sheets, East and West from St. Thomas. And we had enunciators, two sets, about 30 miles apart. So that covered the 120 miles to Windsor and the 120 miles or 100 miles to Welland very nicely. So every 20 minutes or so, an enunciator would be telling you where your train is, both east and west, and they each had a telegraph code. But even the guys that later didn't have telegraphy, but there's a very particular rhythm to it, like da-da-da-dit, da-da-da-dit, da-da, that's Perry eastbound, and da-dit-dit, da-dit-dit, that's Perry westbound. And so, and you had La Salette, and on the other end, you had 2 more locations with 4 different sounds for the eastbound and westbound. So we had
But
that.
on the announcers you used, you had to assume it was the train you think it is, but you couldn't use it definite, could you?
We were writing the time on the train sheet, but if we had to go to court or anything, it was because the sound came on due to determination by the circuit that something was there. If somebody put a crowbar across the 2 rails, it would start.
Now, did you have to use a red ink? We had to use red ink on announcers, not regular.
No. We used a regular ballpoint.
Okay, all right. Well, we couldn't use ballpoints. We had to use the old stick ink. They would let us do ballpoint.
Oh shit! No.
Oh yeah.
We use ballpoint.
No ink eradicator allowed on the property.
Right. Oh well. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, sometimes things look better if a train was speeding, because we knew like it would take 23 minutes. I know from I think it was the last Salette to the next one. Anyway, 20. I remember quite often it was 23, 24, 25 minutes where they put these locations strategically on the division. And but after CN took over, they didn't have any more overhead traffic, like through traffic from the U.S. border to the U.S. border. We just had our local trains. Well, they soon dried up. So pretty soon, they had agreed with the government that they would run the place for 20 years. And after 20 years, they had run the railroad down to the ground, and the speed limit was 30 miles an hour instead of 60 for freight, 70 for TV trains, and 90 for passengers.
Oh, yeah.
Long straight stretches. We had one stretch of 45 or 50 miles without a curve or anything, just straight track. Yeah, it was a wonderful life when it worked.
We were talking before about stories that you might have from your years of experience, and I wondered if you had anything that was particularly memorable that happened to you during the course of your employment.
Well, I did have one scare. We had track work going on in the summer, every summer. Big chunks of main line here or there would be out of service for a few weeks here and a few weeks there. And we had 100 men working on a floating gang, working on repairing everything on the rails, the joints, the ties, whatever, in say a 10-mile stretch. And we'd run a single track around them, So that piece was single track for passenger and freight, both using the other track that was okay. And so this one day, my C&O was supposed to be coming along. It's supposed to be over at our place by 2:30 or latest 3 o'clock. And it was going to go down through the Dardanelles there, through the single track, about 3:30, I figured, when it was going to happen. I set up the order for this train to go. And then westbound showed up. We got late notice of it coming out of through Niagara from Buffalo. And their crew started in Buffalo and either came across at Fort Erie over the International Bridge or over the suspension bridge at Niagara and onto our tracks there and onto the Canada. And anyway, this westbound showed up, and the CNO wanted this westbound to come from there and not get delayed. Well, looked like it was gonna be delayed for this eastbound that was, it was running later than what they said it too. And so the other was earlier. And so anyway, I had it set up for this train to go through on and get the right of way at, and all of a sudden, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. He was running late, and he thought that this SS signal station was 46 or 92, one of those on the eastbound or wherever it was. I can't remember exactly. It doesn't matter. But the point, it was set up that he would have to stop there if it was before 4 o'clock and wait for anything coming the other way and get new orders if there was. But it got to be 4 o'clock, and at 4:10 he came roaring up there, and there's the operator telling him to stop. You know, we're going to hold you, because the westbound was going to come through on his own track, and this eastbound, no, he wasn't there before 4, and the operator come running in and said, the eastbound's going by me. He's not stopping. As you get back out there and swing him up and give him a backup signal in between. Back up and then swing him. Swing him, stop. And he went out, and the train was going by him at 60 miles an hour. No signal. There's no stop signal. And he thought he was okay by his watch, you see. But anyway, he stopped, and he stopped with just a tail end, just a little ways down. The head end did see this operator run back out of the little shack there and give him the backup signal. And this westbound was still half an hour, 45 minutes away. Well, it wasn't so they're looking at each other, but if he had gone through, you know, he could have damaged, he could have had her head on. So anyway, the operator bailed me out. But he was a green guy, and I had to tell him, you got to give them both back up and stop, one after the other, quick, out there. He came back, and he stopped. He's stopping. And he gave him another backup, and they came back by him and said, "What the hell? It's after 4." And he says, "Yeah, I know, but we've let the other guy have the right of way some time ago, thinking you weren't coming." Anyway, so that was where my heart was in my throat. The only time that I had a bad scare, train dispatching.
How about you, Lavina? Do you have any interesting experiences to share with us?
Oh, I think the most interesting job I had was, as I set up in Flin Flon, up in the mining town, where the dog teams used to come up to the station. My office was a little, but I would say 8 by 8 office in the waiting room, and the ticket agent was just across the hall a bit, and the other railway operator was in that office. Everybody in the station except me went home at 5 o'clock. I was there till 11, all by myself, and that was pretty scary at times when, as I said, when these drunks people would come in. And a couple came in one night, and 2 guys, and they said, we're coming to get you. And I says, "No, you aren't." And I says, "I'll stay here all night." And so they said, "Well, one guarded the wicket, and one guarded the door." So, and they couldn't get out by they had dial telephones up there that time, and there was no operator to phone. I couldn't get a hold of the police. And fortunately, the guy at the door passed out. So I opened the door, ran down the station platform to the yard office. So I knew somebody was working, and got help. So they came and got the guys out on the station platform, and were able to get a hold of the police. So that was one instance. But all at Flin Flon, you got used to having blasting underneath you at when you're trying to sleep at night. it was quite an experience working in the mining town up north.
Did you and Charles work at all on the wire together? I know you knew each other through the organ.
No, he was in Eastern Canada. I worked in Western Canada.
Okay. And you were in Moose Jaw.
Yes, I worked in Moose Jaw all by myself.
One of the people when James Wade, James Wade is the president of Morse Code Club, sent out an email, and I do these Zoom meetings on Monday night, and if any of the members wanted to come, and I ended up meeting one of the guys. I forget his name. I've met so many people I can't keep track of them anymore, and he's from Moose Jaw, and he said you should Google it and see what went on there during Prohibition. And Moose Jaw's got a lot of tunnels, right, Lavina?
Yes, the tunnels came in now. Actually, our office is right on the main street, and the tunnel. When I went back there with Chuck actually, and it's was right beside where my office used to be, and you go underneath. They had that Al Capone's. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Was false doors and to seal off the gun supplies and the booze and whatnot.
Yeah.
And they also have a terrific transportation museum there with a railroad station and a telegraph office and all kinds of airplanes and cars, etc. A really interesting place to visit. It's not that far from Regina, not far from the border either.
What would the southern border be? Would it be Montana?
Yeah, or else North Dakota, I'm not sure.
Okay, North Dakota. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that was quite interesting about the tunnels, Ed. And Al Capone and the liquor and during the Prohibition. Quite a bit of history right there.
Yeah, it's interesting how all this stuff interconnects and one thing leads to another and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I met another guy in this Morse Code Club, nothing to do with the railroad, and he was a farmer, a rancher in Florida. And he told me about ranching in Florida, and we talked about the grass. And I said, well, I know ranchers in Montana. Oh, this is different grass. And he told me where the grass had to be imported from Egypt and Africa to get grass that would grow in Florida. I learned a lot from these people, whether it was rare, historic things. It's pretty interesting. Pretty good. Pretty good.
I don't know whether Chuck might mention that because I was with him when he and his wife when we went down there.
Then you have that museum that you guys went to this past year, and they took. This is a railroad. Where is that railroad museum that you guys all went to? And they got the train, and they had their days in August, and they taught people. People had to learn Morse code now, so they could communicate. Ed, into I think there's 3 railroad buildings in this complex.
This is in Calgary, in the province of Alberta. It's a bit of a distance. Calgary is the oil well town, and the park's a large park. It has a lake in it with the paddle wheelers and a train track running around and trolley systems, and they brought in 3 railroad stations. And they're all hooked up for Morse code. It's a really good place to go to visit.
Yeah, it looked like it. And when they were talking before, Ed, about the key, and Jim was saying how he was slow and how the guy got pissed, I've done a lot of reading on this, and it's the book is talking exactly the way Jim was talking, because it would be like me talking this way. That's what a slow key sounds like, and it drove these guys crazy.
Did you read my write-up in the dots and dashes?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
I've been going there for about 20 years, I guess.
All right. Well, we've been going for about 1 hour and 20 minutes, so I think we probably about time to wrap it up here. Anybody have any closing words that they'd like to get out before we?
I'd like to throw one more story in.
Okay.
Working the third shift at Waterbury. As I said, we did the janitor work too, and I was in there, and it's a beautiful station, but it's got the big tall ceilings with the curves up to the ceiling where it curves over. And I'm looking at this thing, and the walls were filthy. And I mean, they were terrible. So I fired up we had a coal burning furnace. It was wintertime, but we didn't have hot water. But what I'd do is take the valve off the side of it and hitch a little pipe into a bucket of water, and I'd heat it up that way with steam. And I washed all the walls all the way up to where that curved part was. It looked so clean. The agent, Mr. Carpenter, comes in the morning. What did you do? And I said, what? I washed the walls. It looks so much better. He says, yeah, you washed off the watermark for the 1927 flood, how high it was up on the walls. It's gone forever now.
Oh, no.
I said, oops.
Yeah. I've been meaning to send you, if I can find it, a picture of the station where Thomas Edison was fired. It's in Ontario, near Stratford, Ontario.
I just read about that. I'm reading that book, The Victorian Internet, and that story is in there.
Uh-huh. It's a stone station.
Yeah. And he learned Morse code because he saved the station agent's kid who walked out in the track. Is that correct?
Well, he hooked up a device to answer the dispatcher so he could sleep on the midnight shift.
Yeah. Well, he was always inventing.
Yeah.
He's always inventing.
And I've got a minute. I've got the picture of, you can see the station I grew up in.
Raise it up some.
A little more.
Little more.
They're getting there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Imagine that, Ed.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's a Great Northern station. It wasn't under the CN when it was built. And then the Great Northern was taken over by the Canadian National about 1923, I think.
Well, looking at that picture, maybe before we go, Jim, you had sent some pictures in, and Lavina, I had some pictures from you. Let's just take a quick look at those and see what we have to say about them. Yeah, Jim, this is one of your photos of the headquarters building and train shed at St. Albans.
Yep. Yeah, you heard of Jim Shaughnessy?
Yes, indeed.
That's one of Jim's pictures. He authorized me. I printed a lot of stuff up of his from his negatives. He said I can use them in any way, as long as I don't sell the picture, and I give him credit that he took the picture. And this is train 332. The ambassador comes out of Montreal, gets into St. Albans around 11:30 in the morning, heading south to eventually to Boston and into New York. But that little building I told you about, the switch tender's building, is right there on the right-hand side. And that's the building, as I say, now it's in my backyard. The dispatcher's office there was right in front of the engine. You can see the St. Albans sign there. That's where the original dispatcher's office was. It eventually ended up behind the engine. And now there's nobody on the bottom floor at all. The second floor is the dispatcher center. The train shed was taken down in September of 1963, the last of its kind in the United States. And everybody screamed and hollered, but that's one of Jim's pictures. He did a lot of beautiful work there. Passed away about 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I'm guessing this was around 1954, 55.
It's just about 56 or 55, 54. Yeah, right now, 55, 56, because I can remember them running steam out of St. Albans when I was there before they went over to Bud cars.
And Lavina, there is you at work, it looks like.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Got your hand on the key.
This is in one of the Calgary stations.
Is this when you were working, or is this a demonstration? That's the museum.
No, this was When I went to visit them in August,
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought.
and this is the Morse Club there. They're all they all learn Morse to try to communicate between the three stations.
It looks like you have more women there than you do men.
Yeah, well, I'm in there right in the center.
Mhm.
And the women know Morse code also?
Well, they're learning.
They're learning. That's fantastic.
And this is on the platform. Where is this, Lavina?
Yeah, this is the one of the trains in the park,
Okay.
the steam train,
This is at Calgary?
Calgary. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And what are we looking at here?
This one, Chuck can talk about this. This is the old station in St. Thomas. It's built in the 1800 in an Italian style, and
Yeah.
and it's renovated.
Now, is this is this a historic photo or is this a modern?
Well, that engine 5700 is a Hudson that now resides in the museum at which I volunteer every week. I'm there at least 3 days a week. And this 5700 is our centerpiece. Canadian National arranged to donate it to our budding railway museum back in 1989, or 88 was it came here. And we parked it in front of the station out here with a CN Express car. And that was known as the MCR Depot, but it was actually built by the Canada Southern in 1873. It was operational as the headquarters of the Canada Southern Railway between the Niagara Frontier and Amherstburg, Ontario, opposite, what's its name, in Michigan there, Warren.
Mhm.
Across
It
the
looks
river.
it looks like it's been beautifully restored. Is it operational?
Yeah, there's tenants in it now. There's different businesses in it, mostly offices, but there is a coffee maker in there that grinds coffee and sells it, whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Is the locomotive itself operational?
no, it's
Okay.
just it looks like we could put water and coal to it and it should go. But of course, it'd take $1 million. They make you take all the cladding off here in Canada. All that has to come off, and then they can chalk mark every 4-inch square and number them, and then do the what do women have for the tummy to look at the baby? A sound thing.
Ultrasound?
Ultrasound. You have to ultrasound the whole boiler for any thin spots or cracks or any defects. And then once that gets done, then you can test it with cold water, warm water, hot water, steam, and low pressure, steam, high pressure. And then you can put the cladding back on.
Yeah.
So we're not going to run it. The CN hasn't got any tracks for us now to get onto a CN or CP directly in that area. We're isolated with, we go to Port Stanley, but the rail is so, I think it's 90-pound rail between St. Thomas and Port Stanley, the 9 miles. And they won't let a big engine on that, like that
Right.
on there.
Right.
No use,
Jim,
no
this
use
is
trying to make it run.
right. Jim,
Yep,
this is at St. I'm sorry.
This is, that's right, it's an Italy Yard. Italy Yard was built in 1893, and when it was built, it was the largest railroad east of the Mississippi, the biggest yard. It's gravity, not a hump yard, it's gravity down there. You lift up and go, and it's gonna go 4 miles north of St. Albans. And they have happened before. But the building on the left is the old yard office. I originally started working at the telegraph office when I worked in the yard down there. The engine on the 7919, one of the first diesels they got, but I never could figure out the guy up on top. He's pouring something into a funnel. I mean, is that the way they change the oil in these things? I don't know anything about power.
Is
Maybe
sand?
sand.
Sand, maybe?
That's right. It could have been sand too. That's right. Yeah. But that's in the yard. See, when I came back to work for the railroad, I didn't start right back as dispatcher. They called me back as a dispatcher, but I had to build up seniority. And the first thing I did was a checker sealer in the yard out here, opening car doors. The yard is a mile long and about a quarter of a mile wide. I tell you, a lot of tracks out there when you're keeping track of two switchers switching in the yard and then turning in all your slips at the end where they can make up their trains. But that's where I really learned railroading, because before, when you work at a station, you don't learn much about the railroad. People come in, buy tickets, and the crew doesn't come in very often unless they have a lot of switching. And but once I got out there, I learned what makes the railroad run. Besides, it's all the people. That's all the things you have to do.
Yeah.
But
And
that was
what year is
taken in-
this
yeah, that's
photograph?
there.
Excuse me, folks, I have to go down for lunch now.
Okay,
So I'm going to have to go off now.
okay.
Talk to you
Nice.
later, Lavina.
Very interesting.
Lavina,
Yeah.
nice seeing you. And I remember your picture in the dots and dashes there, the magazine. I saw your pictures. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks. Nice to
you.
talk. Nice to hear everything.
Bye-bye now, Lavina.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Jim, what year is this picture?
This has got to be somewhere about in the 1940s.
Okay,
That is the dispatcher's office in St. Albans on the first floor. I'm standing up on the left, changing over. That's Howard Ryan, the dispatcher. He and I went to school together, and I hired out the railroad first, and he followed me a year later.
Yeah,
And we
Judge-
both ended up as dispatchers. And I was
Judge-
probably
Judge-
on the relief job here, taking over for him in the morning. And I had the picture taken, but I haven't changed much. Weight still stomach sticking out there, but that place is all closed up now. All it is an empty room. So nothing in there at all. Dispatchers are right above it, the dispatchers of today. So
So judging from the computers, I'm guessing late 80s or early 90s?
exactly. Yep, exactly. Into the 90s. Yep. This is another one of me in the station at Essex Junction as the telegraph operator working the day shift. You're looking at 10 minutes of 8 in the morning. That's when the Girl Scout specials came in for the big Girl Scout special back in 1962. The man way to the left is the ticket is the passenger agent. The man sitting at the Jack Welch became was a telegraph operator, dispatcher, then employee relations. Mr. Langlois is the conductor. I know him. His son also went to work for the railroad. Next is Eddie Movalli. He's the superintendent of the railroad. All people that I worked with, and they were really good to work with. Those are all railroad men right there. So, but I was the operator for the day at the station, the new station built in 1958. They tore down the old one, which had a train shed on it too. But I don't know who took the picture, but somebody sent it to me one day. And I said, "Yeah, that's me." Telegraph was still there, and there I am
Yeah, I
in
see.
1965. That's in the dispatcher's office in St. Albans. You can still see the telegraph key on the counter there. You can see the sounders up on top. You're working on train sheets. No more train sheets. It's all recorded into the computer now. I don't know how many, I got train sheets on the CV back to just about, well, I got them up to about 1890 where they start. I've got the rosters of all the people back from that day all the way up through. So, but the box in front of that's a selector button. You push two different buttons there, and that would make the selector system in, and the bell would ring in the station. So, good job. Now that's the remote control operator job in the yard office in Italy Yard. The CTC board below it there shows all the different switches at the yard, and it lists trains coming in from the north. Then it's in the middle. It's got tracks, and then it's got upon Lake Street where the general office building is. There's control there. The over on the wall there on the thing with the dial-up, that's when you want to select stations for the dispatcher to call in. It replaced the old type. It became a push button type. So I don't think I could see it that day, but usually I had my old pocket watch hanging there. I didn't look at the watch on the wall. I used my pocket watch hanging there. So that was a good job. And there I am in Swanton, 1967, just the way it looks. Now, believe this or not, it looks like that today because They closed the station down in 1969. The Abenaki Indians took it over for a while, and then they gave up on it. And the station gave up. The lumber company next door bought it. No, it was a feed company bought it. They didn't want it. They were going to tear it down. They got to the Swanton Historical Society, which I am part of, and says, if you guys want the station, you can have it. So the president calls me up and says, we've got it. And I says, we got what? He said, we got the station, but we got to move it in a year. And I said, yeah, sure. That's going to be fun. I call it the bowling alley because it was 24 feet wide and 90 feet long. The freight house was on the other end of it, and it was something else. But at that time, the St. J and LC Railroad had closed down. The Lamoille Valley was closed down. Where their engine house used to be, the turntable pit belonged to the state of Vermont. They went out of their way to cut all the red tape to make it possible to move the station, which is about probably a third of a mile to a half a mile away, down the main track. The railroad comes out with 3 flat cars and a crew with an engine. The mover jacked this thing up, slid it sideways out onto the flat cars. And I asked him, I said, what are you going to do at Lake Street? You've got this overhang, which is another 4-foot overhang on each side. He says, I'm going to clear the signals at Lake Street by 6 inches on each side. So they moved down there, and he had it right on the nose, 6 inches. So the power company came in, moved the wires. The telephone company came in, moved, no charge. And we put it off onto a temporary scaffolding for a while, bridging front work, put in a new foundation, put the station on it, and now it's open out to the Swanton Museum. It's open during the summertime, and it looks like just it did in the telegraph office, the way it did. We put it all back together. I got the train order board signals off to the left. This looks like my cellar also. I modeled my cellar to look just like this. So, but that was 1967, 2 years before they closed it. So,
I would love to see some pictures of the station being moved.
well, I probably can get them. I've got video. That's another thing I did before I retired from the railroad. We came up with public access TV, and I went in and volunteered for the people. They said, "Do you know anything about photography?" And I says, "Like what?" He said, "Well, we're running videos and camera stuff like that." Well, after I left the railroad back there in 1968, 69, I eventually ended up at WCAX TV in Burlington. They called me up and said, "You're out of work, looking for a job." And I says, "No, not really." I says, I'm out of work, but not looking for a job. I was running my own business called Jim's Custom Candidates. I had 2 other photographers working for me. I was doing something like 40 weddings a year. So I ran out of other people had to come and help me. And then the WCAX TV, CBS, calls up and says, "You're out of work, looking for a job." And I said, "No." He said, "We need you, that somebody knows about photography and video work, stuff like that." So I went down and got interviewed. I got the job in the spring of 1972. And I worked for them for 8 years. And in that 8 years I was there, I shot 40,000 feet of 16 millimeter movie film on the railroads around Vermont. That's a lot, and it was free. That was the nice thing about it. Free. So, and I got a lot of it put over to digitized over to video. I've been selling videos all over the place. I haven't done for a couple of years now, but that was where I ended up. And even before that job, I was in medical photography at the hospital in Burlington doing open heart surgery photography. So I started photography plus my own. This is the first station I broke in. This is Milton, Vermont, 13 miles south of St. Albans. Mr. Jacobs down there standing beside the station. The interesting about Jake, that he was in Ripley, believe it or not, in the 1950s, as having more jobs in one town than any person could have. He was a station agent. He was a fire chief. He was the chief of police. He was a town clerk. He did it all. And there's a big article in the papers about Jake, but he was quite a man. But he ran that whole thing. He did everything there and ran the town too. It's a small town, but the big thing they had was a big international paper mill around the corner from here that they serviced.
Is that station still standing?
Nope, it's taken down. It's gone. Now that is Montpelier Junction, the back side of it, but that is what it looked like in 1956. So it's just identical. I started there, worked in there, started in 55 in the summer, and I worked at the 4 to midnight shift. And today up on the roof, where the chimney to the left is, there's a big box up on top of the roof. And everybody says, they see it in the pictures, what was that for? Well, when they did away with steam engines, if you look to the right, you can see the standpipe there where they would put away. But diesels, especially the steam generators on the passenger trains, the RS3s they had, required water up on top of the roof with a big water tank that filled with water. And any time a train needed water, they could stop there and fill up their tanks. But that is still on the station. The station is still there. That is Swanton Station before I got there, because you notice the train order signal is gone. It's not in there. They didn't go into 1927. But that station is the way it looks today, being moved to our right about a half a mile down the track. The freight house is over on the left-hand side. That took care of the CV Railway, plus the Canada Atlantic Railway came in there from Ottawa, came across through over on the and down the Valleyfield sub, down through into Kantic, then down into East Elburg, and then they had trackage rights from East Elburg into the north end of town here, out in the woods. I have gone through. I found the round table pits. I found the pits for the engine house. I found the bunk room. I found where the coal chute was. The tracks were about 1,700 feet long. And walking through it back around 10 years ago, I tripped over an old switch stand. I says, I know where that's got to go. Took 4 people to pick the stuff in coming up because it was so heavy. But I still want to go back out there, but I've got the blueprints for it. And eventually, see, the Grand Trunk got control of the Canada Atlantic. And then they kept the yard there until about 1943 or 44, when the CV was backing cars in there and burning them for scrap, get the big piles of it. So it's long gone now, but you can walk through it. But the station has been moved. It's gone from there. That's mileage 109, almost to the beside the picture. So
Do you happen to know the date on this photo?
that one there, I say about 1910. That's a photo postcard. And it's interesting, up on the top of the roof there, where this comes up to, if you haven't heard it before, if you look at the front of it, I know we had a picture of it, it actually shows on the lower part is like 2 pistons and steam engines, and they go up onto a boiler on the top, and that's the way they were made to look like that on the stations. The plant way down to the left was a black powder plant too. That you had to be careful of.
So Chuck is showing your picture there. Raise it up some more.
A New York Central
Yeah, a little
Hudson,
bit to your left.
And
Oh,
so-
yeah.
out-chopped in St. Thomas, Ontario. And it's just some beautiful shape. Looks like the train master in full regalia there, about 1930 or something,
All dressed up. Yep.
40. And his tail, I think he's got a coat of tails there. But anyway, we had that engine on deck here for replacement if necessary. For years, we had a big Hudson sitting here, and in case one of the main liners going through in steam era needed the replacement, fell apart, something was wrong, we could put that engine on, and that high speed first class NYC train could keep going.
Part of the thing about the CVCN, that the CV 700 class used to run all the way into Brockville. With our
right?
train 490 and they used to go into Brockville. They were only allowed something like 35, 40 miles an hour because they were so heavy that if they rocked too much, they would break the rails. Every time they'd swing one way or the other. But they were a powerful engine. They'd go up Roxbury Mountain. They didn't need helpers or pusher in. They'd take a track. But they were the largest steam locomotive to run in New England states.
Yeah.
And I rode behind one on the last trip, but I never got.
Now, is that a Vanderbilt tender?
Not really, is it? Vanderbilt's more round, way over.
Okay,